Today we're talking through revered weapons of the Emperor, twisted demon weapons of Chaos, and the dead shiniest of power claws and choppers. Let's talk about some of the best relics for every faction in Warhammer 40K. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking relics, and I thought it might be fun to go through each codex and army and talk about what I think are some of the strongest picks in terms of the fancy bits of war gear that their characters can lug into battle. We'll go through each army and faction in turn, talk about one of my favourites, why I think they're strong, and also a few other honourable mentions that could have claimed the top spot. As I'm sure most people who are watching this will be aware, relics are a fairly important part of list construction. Most armies can typically have 1 to 3 of these at a 2000 point game, and you have to buy them in for 1 extra command point now. They're often really well worth the investment, as rather than giving you just a 1-turn power boost, they give you an effect that usually lasts all game, and some of them can be absolutely game changing. I have a feeling that relics will be a little bit less frequently appearing on the battlefields after Warzone Nephilim. The main rules update gives you only 6 command points to play with pre-game, and also you don't get any of them for free anymore, you have to buy them in with command points. Overall, I do suspect that might mean a few of the more borderline picks just don't get taken as much anymore, and perhaps puts a little bit more emphasis on really picking the best relics for your faction. Let's go through each of the armies in turn, and we'll start with the Imperium and with the Space Marines. I think perhaps one of the most solid all-round picks from the core codex is the Teeth of Terror. It turns a chainsword into an absolute blender, giving you strength +1, AP 2 and damage 2, and a massive 3 extra attacks. With Shock Assault you could have a character swinging with 8 attacks, and it's quite nice that you don't actually have to pay any points for the individual war gear before that. The chainsword's free, so it turns a very cheap character into a powerful combatant. It can be quite nice for support characters that are only armed with a chainsword, like say a Blood Angel Sanguinary Priest, and it's going to be a lot better in certain chapters like, again, Blood Angels, where you get +1 to wound in it, and the strength 5 isn't as bad a thing, or say White Scars, when you can have all those attacks on +1 damage on the charge in their Assault Doctrine. I think it's a nice general purpose fighting relic if you're unsure. Maybe other decent choices from the core codex are the Benediction of Fury. That's quite nice for a chaplain with Mantra of Strength for an enormous amount of high damage attacks. The Vox Spiritum increases aura range for Primaris units, can be a nice choice for an apothecary with their Feel No Pain perhaps, and I feel that the armour Indomitus is pretty solid as well. It gives you a 2+ armour save and a 4+ invul, going to 3+ once per game, and it's a really decent survivability boost for something without an invul save like a Librarian. If we just briefly take a look through the chapters, for the Ultramarines the Seal of Oath is very nice. Basically gives you big rerolls to your own core units against one enemy target unit. It can be quite nice for just removing one important threat from the board early. And their Sanctic Halo is quite a nice durability boost as well. A 3+ invul usually means that you're going to have a decent chance of keeping any one character alive. White Scars have a few good ones. The Plume of the Planesrunner isn't too bad. That one's +1 to advance and charge for infantry within range, and that can pair quite well with things like Vanguard Vets or Blade Guard veterans trying to get across the board as quick as possible. With the advance and charge that White Scars have, it will usually give you 2-inch more threat range. Otherwise, the Mantle of the Stormseer is quite nice with their decent psychic powers, gives you +1 to cast, and Wrath of the Heavens is a super fast jet bite that jumps over enemy units, quite a nice way to deliver a scary character. For the Iron Hands, I think that the Ironstone is pretty standout. It gives you a -1 damage on non-core vehicles, and you can put it on really big stuff like Titanic things, or solid tanks like Repulsors or Gladiators, and it's a really nice defensive boost. It's one of the reasons why, if you're running a Space Marine Lord of War, Iron Hands is likely one of the best ways to do it. Otherwise, they've got a few quite nice ones. The Gorgon Chain gives you a 4+ invul and -1 to wound, very good durability. The Tempered Helm is a nice one for command point regeneration, and the Axe of Medusa is just a solid all-round decent damage weapon, strength 7 usually, AP 3 and damage 3 too. For the Raven Guard, I don't find their relic section maybe quite as overwhelming. Maybe if I had to pick one, then Ex Tenebris isn't too bad. 3 shots at 36 inches at strength 4, AP 2, damage 2. It's a sniper weapon that gives you +1 to hit and ignores cover, and it would give you at least a reasonable chance of offing some light support characters, particularly if you pair it with some eliminators or something. Otherwise, Raven's Fury seems okay for jump pack characters, giving you advance and charge, and mortal wound impact hits is good, and the Ebon Claws are some nice general purpose lightning claws that are AP3, D3 damage, and still reroll the wound rolls. For the Salamander's Mantle is quite a nice one. It can give you -1 to wound, and you can combine that with a Warlord trait that gives you +2 toughness, so in theory you've got something like a Bike or a Gravis Captain running around with 7 toughness and -1 to wound, being wounded on 6s by things like strength 6 weapons. Otherwise, I think they've got a few other fun ones. Vulcan's Sigil gives you a once per game +1 attack aura, and also gives you a further +1 attack on your character all game long, 2 decent enough abilities. The Tome of Velcona gives you +1 to cast, and an extra spell. Not bad for their defensive spells like Fire Shield or Drakeskin. And the Obsidian Aquila gives you a small aura of 6+ Feel No Pain for core units, kinda gives you the durability effect of an Apothecary without having to pay for one, and not bad to throw on a character supporting some other units. For the Imperial Fists, I think the Eye of Hypnoth is by far the standout choice. Give it to a captain, and your ranged units will get reroll 1s to hit and to wound, so are just generally much more efficient. And for Crimson Fists, I quite like their Fist of Vengeance. A damage to the Power Fist with no -1 to hit gets the job done. I think the Black Templars are positively overflowing with decent relics though. Maybe one of the best might be the Crusader Helm, a +3" to your auras, and 1 core unit can be put in the Assault Doctrine each turn. That could be quite nice on an Apothecary for the Black Templars, and then heal one of the fighting members of their squad each turn. Otherwise, the Ancient Breviary allows you to cast litanies on a 2d6 and keep the highest, so it gives you massive extra reliability there. The Aurelian Shroud gives you a great 1-turn durability boost of 4+ invuls for core units next to them. If you've got a big battle line with 3 big Crusader squads, that could give a 4+ invul to half your army right there. The Sword of Judgment gives you strength 7 AP3 damage 3 attacks, that can be quite a popular choice on squad sergeants. And Tannhauser's Bones are another excellent durability one. Give it to a chaplain on bike with a whole ton of wounds, and he'll be a massive pain to shift as he can never take more than 1 damage per hit. For Blood Angels, the Wrath of Baal is quite a commonly taken one. It gives you +2" movement to your jump packs nearby one of their ancients. Maybe doesn't seem like the biggest movement buff ever, but if that makes the difference of being able to credibly make a charge or have to hand back, it does mean that your Blood Angels will be jumping really quite a long way across the board and then charging. Otherwise, the Visage of Death gives you -1 to hit in melee and also cancels enemy obsec nearby. If you have that with Rites of War, then you've got a character that basically guarantees an objective being yours. And I quite like the icon of the Angel as well. It allows you to reroll charges in an aura nearby. Might save some command points on deep strike charges and things. For Dark Angels, I think the Pennant of Remembrance is quite a nice one for supporting Deathwing. You give it to a Deathwing Ancient, and it puts a buff on a squad for -1 damage. When they've already got their Transhuman Physiology rule and Armour of Contempt Terminator armour, that's just going to give you another massive barrier to shifting them. They also have the Reliquary of the Repentant. That's one that allows invul saves to get reduced to 5+ within 3 inches of the bearer. A lot of the time that's not going to be the biggest deal in the world, but whenever you're tangling with something with a 4+ invul, it means that you're pretty much guaranteed to punch through them hard. Maybe quite nice on a Ravenwing character zooming around. Finally, another quite fun one is Arbiter's Gaze. That's a Talon Master buff that makes them hit on 2+ rather than 3s, and also ignore cover as well, which is kind of useful with Armour of Contempt about. For the Space Wolves, I think maybe the Armour of Russ is perhaps one of the most deserving. Fights Last is an awesome ability to help dominate the combat phase, and this gives you Fights Last to one of the units in melee, but also a massive durability boost with a 2+ armour and 4+ invul. Really quite nice on something like a Rune Priest with a jump pack. Otherwise, the Wolf and Stone amps up your melee, it allows you to reroll charges nearby, and grants one unit an early assault doctrine, or improves it if you happen to already be in Savage Fury. A really nice boost to any of your squads that you can apply it to. Finally, if you just want damage, then the Frost Weapon is pretty fun. Maybe put on Lightning Claws for +1 strength and +1 damage. That would make a Wolf Lord or something a lot more threatening. For Death Watch, maybe one of the best is the Beacon Angelis. This is the one that allows you to teleport a squad somewhere on the board within 6 inches of the bearer. It means that you can potentially get a squad into the action really quite early. Maybe have a fast moving character on a bike or jump pack zoom up the board, and then deliver the squad exactly where they need to be. Not bad for an army like Deathwatch with a decent amount of close range shooting. Otherwise, the Tome of Ectoclades is also monstrously powerful. It gives you a once per game reroll to wounds against 1 datasheet for a turn. It's pretty handy no matter what core units you're buffing with it, but it seems very strong on a Dreadnought Castle. Particularly Volkite Contemptors with their Mortals on 6s absolutely love this. Finally, I think the Dominus Aegis maybe is deserving of a shout. It gives you an aura of 5+ invuls. It did used to be a very popular one, though I guess it has become quite a lot less relevant following Armour of Contempt, as you're not often saving on your invuls unless against very high AP attacks. Leaving Space Marine land now, and then we have the Guard. As I believe the single oldest codex in the game now, the Relics are looking a bit on the lackluster side. Perhaps Kira's Aquila is going to be one of the more useful ones, a 5+ chance to gain a CP each time your opponent uses stratagems. It should usually net you more command points than you've spent on it, and Guard typically have a fair few infantry characters that are okay to remain safe for most of the game. Otherwise, if you do happen to be playing Cadians, then Gatekeeper the damage 3 battle cannon is quite a nice one. It means that you can have one Rust that's still quite a credible range threat and doesn't have to be up close like the Demolishers. And other fun ones are Dagger of Two Sark to outflank a unit and an officer, and a bit less restrictively than Strategic Reserve. And I quite like the Lambden Lion Scion Regiment's Refractor Field Generator. That one gives you an aura of 5+ imbuls, and when your Scions are only saving on a 4+ anyway, that's really quite a nice boost. Sisters next, and one of the most commonly taken relics on fighty canonesses is the Chaplet of Sacrifice, basically a composite boost, but all things that you really want on a fighty melee character. First up, she gets to use an epic deed for free once per game, potentially saving you a command point or letting you use an option that you just wouldn't have spent CP on. A nice damage boost in re-rolling all hit rolls, both at ranged and in melee. And then finally, when she is killed, you get to either shoot or fight in death, meaning that if she's killed in combat, you're guaranteed to be able to swing back with some nasty damage. Just for the single command point, that's really quite a lot of nice upgrades. Pair it with a dangerous warlord trait and perhaps a blessed blade, and you're going to be doing quite well. Otherwise, sisters quite like their support relics for their characters. The Book of St. Lucius gives you bigger auras, such as for the Hospitaller. Having Feel No Pains go a bit further is always nice. The Sigil Ecclesiasticus is a very tempting pick for something like a Dog Martyr. You get to know and recite one more hymn of battle, which it basically doubles the utility of the character. And the Litanies of Faith is quite a good one for your miracle dice. Lets you reroll one miracle dice once per battle round, hopefully avoids a few more of those 1s and 2s, and gets you a few more helpful 5s and 6s. For the Adeptus Custodes, the Praetorian Plate has been quite nice since the Codex dropped. It's a Relic Terminator armour that gives you +1 toughness, but far more importantly, once per game your character can do a heroic intervention move, casually teleporting to somewhere on the board that's within 3 inches of a friendly unit and in combat with an enemy. It means that if your opponent tries to kill one of your Custodes units, they might be unexpectedly fighting both that unit and a fighty shield captain, or even if your opponent's units are just completely out of combat, if they happen to be just a little bit too close to one of your units, then suddenly they can have an angry Terminator captain to the face. If it gets you an extra fight phase with one of these guys, that's probably worth it straight off the bat, never mind swinging a key combat or something. For other choices, the Castellum's Mark is quite nice. You get to redeploy 2 units. Those ones usually tend to be pretty strong wherever they come up, pulling back a unit that was about to get gunned off the board if your opponent got first turn, or putting things in places where they can get line of sight to shoot something turn 1. Both of those are usually good. And just out of the shield companies, I do quite like the Stasis Oubliette for the Shadow Keepers. Again, that's a casual ability to hand out fights last. It means that a character can be safe in combat without the enemy interrupting on them. The Admech do have really quite a lot of solid choices for relics, and they can put them in their squads with a stratagem as well. One fairly common boost is the Raiment of the Technomartyr. This one grants a bit more survivability to a Tech Priest, so a 5+ Feel No Pain there to make them rather hardy, but a bit more importantly also doubles down on that by allowing one unit to ignore ballistic skill modifiers. It's particularly good on big units of Rangers, which will be able to move and shoot without penalty, but on top of that it also allows them to ignore things like dense cover or innate -1 to hit abilities, so it keeps their firepower really reliable. When that's paired with the increased survivability, it makes it pretty good value overall. Otherwise, I think it's hard to go too far wrong with Exemplar's Eternity. That's the one where Skitarii Marshal gets you reroll 1s to hit and to wound. I think particularly with Core Iron Striders making a comeback, I feel like that might come into play to buff them again. The Tempocopia is another way of handing out fights last, and that can be put in things like Ruststalker units who are quite threatening anyway. Always nice to have more insurance for the squad surviving to fight. And out of Lucius, I think the Solar Flare is rather good. It allows you to teleport the bearer and one core unit somewhere else on the game. Hopefully delivering a whole bunch of seriously scary close range fire, again is quite good with Rangers. 2 CP and their guns are going to be rapid fire too once more, so again this one might be more tempting once again. For the Grey Knights, I think it's hard to choose anything much but the Sigil of Exigence. It's the rather annoying shenanigans one for the Grandmaster Dread Knight most of the time. It's a once per game ability where the bearer can choose to teleport away from the enemy shooting them, so say you try to shoot the Dread Knight with some high power anti-tank weapons, all of a sudden it's somewhere else entirely on the board, hidden behind terrain. Grandmaster Dread Knights are just ludicrously dangerous models, and putting one on one of these guys means that you could play very aggressively with one indeed, knowing that if the enemy does try and last up with heavy guns, you know that you're guaranteed to be safe. It can often lead to the opponent choosing just to never shoot at it for fear of you redeploying it to an even more problematic position, even though sometimes that might have been the best case scenario. I feel that one's probably by far the best, but otherwise there's things like the Cuirass of Sacrifice, +1 to saves and a 5+ feel no pain for infantry. That's a crazily tanky little model with armour of contempt. And the Etheric Conduit is quite a nice one for tech marines. It allows you to heal 3 wounds per turn, and when that's 3 wounds of Nemesis Dreadnought, that's quite a big deal. For the Imperial Knights, they're kind of spoilt for choice. Relics are basically a big part of army building in them. You have so few models that the relic choices are almost part of your war gear. I feel like they made a big effort to make most of the Imperial Knight relics at least somewhat enticing, but just here are a few of the better ones perhaps. Firstly, I do really quite like the Heart of Ion, which is a Mechanicus only one. It basically allows you to take 1 mortal wound at the end of the command phase for +1 movement, +1 to your advance and charge rolls, and perhaps most importantly, +1 to wound for 1 weapon. If you need to get into combat, it'll certainly help you get there, but +1 to wound is pretty powerful on any of the knight weapons. Maybe some of the more obvious choices are things like the Avenger Gatling Cannon or the Castellan's Plasma Decimator. It means that there's very few things that they won't do massive damage against in the game. Otherwise, there's all sorts of strong picks. The Bastard's Helm gives you +1 to wound for 2 armigers, which is excellent firepower on Moiraxes or Helverins. The Mentor Seal makes your Preceptor's teachings more reliable. Judgment is a fun carapace missile pod that gives you D3+3 essentially crack missile shots that ignore line of sight. Even with the barrage nerfs, that's enough to be scary. The Banner of Macarius Triumphant is an Imperialis one where you gain Obsec and you also count as being 1 honor point extra, so 2 very nice benefits there. And you've also just got straight up things like the Armour of Sainted Ion for 2 up armour and a 4+ invul in melee from Sanctuary. Knights are usually going to be exposed to enemy retaliation, so any extra durability is usually very greatly appreciated. Lastly, for the Imperium, we've got the Imperial Inquisition. I'd say some of their other choices like their Psychic aren't too bad, or their datasheet abilities, but I'm not really the biggest fan of their relics. You can buy them in for cheap at least. I think you get an extra Warlord trait and relic both just for the 1 CP, but the relics don't really seem much to write home about. Perhaps you could take the Blade of the Ordo, which is a strength +1, AP3 and damage D3 weapon, giving you at least a little bit of combat threat against most things, and it becomes damage 3 against their chosen quarry targets. Otherwise, digital weapons might be almost as good, just gives you an extra mortal wound if you hit an extra attack in melee. Or if you're a buffing character, you might just be better with Black Shroud, -1 to wound the model, so your supporting piece is less likely to get taken out. Next up, let's move into Chaos, and Codex Chaos Space Marines really hasn't been out all that long at time of recording. I do feel that some of the choices might just be a little bit less established at this point. Starting off with some of the generic ones, the Intoxicating Elixir for Slanesh is quite cool. Obviously you need to be a Slanesh model, but it's a once per game survivability boost that basically guarantees that your model won't die. You nominate it in a fight phase, presumably when your opponent was just about to strike you first. Your model can never lose more than 3 wounds this phase, and also you get D3 extra attacks for when you get to strike back, which almost all the time you'll be able to guarantee that you will. On a tooled up combat character, that's really quite scary versus certain melee armies or units. If the opponent has to try and kill you in melee, then they basically guarantee that their charge is going to just kill a few wounds off it, and then they're going to get hit back very hard. Otherwise, for the demon weapons, I feel like a Lock of the Black is going to be a nice upgrade. That's the one that just gives you an extra mortal wound every time you successfully wound an enemy. Whether you take it on something like Lightning Claws or a Thunderhammer, it's usually going to land you a few more mortal wounds when you fight. Otherwise, the Gorget of Eternal Hatred is a nice defensive one, a 4+ invul and +1 to your armor saves. +1 to your armor saves is really nice with Armor of Contempt, and it's pretty good on something like a Lord Discordant or a Terminator Lord. As a bonus, if your opponent's nearby when you kill the model, then enemies within 3 inches also take D3 mortal wounds on a 2+. All around very strong, and makes characters very hard to put down. Finally, I think the Eye of Tzeentch might be an interesting one for Psychers. A Tzeentch model gets +1 to cast, and casts of a 9+ can't be denied either. If you really want to make some Malefic spells go through with a Master of Possession, that one seems okay if you've made them Tzeentch. Chaos Marines have got all sorts of Legion relics on offer as well. I thought we'd just pick one of the more interesting ones for each of the Legion choices. For Black Legion, their Veilbreaker plate is nice. You can teleport your character and a core unit nearby anywhere on the board, so it's great for redeploying something like slow units like Terminators. Kind of similar to the better known Necron Veil of Darkness, I think this one will be an interesting one for Black Legion armies. For word bearers, the Epistle of Lorgar seems like an auto-include on a Dark Apostle. Your priest gets to know and chant another prayer, and I believe it's the only way in Codex Chaos Marines that you can get Dark Apostles casting 2 prayers per turn and basically doubling the value of their main purpose. For Night Lords, I probably find their relic section just about the most underwhelming in the book. There's a few fighty core relics, but maybe the Scourging Chains might be one of the interesting ones. The AP on your melee weapons gets better by -1, and also enemies within engagement range get -1 attack, so it gives you more damage and durability. Maybe could be okay for something like a Chaos Lord with a Thunderhammer, the extra AP would help there a lot. For Iron Warriors, the Techno-Venomous Mecha Tendrils seem fairly auto-include for a Warpsmith. This means that he heals 3 wounds on vehicles each turn, so the demon engines get put back together a bit quicker. That on its own I think is very very good, but also it gives him a really quite substantial melee boost as well. The Mecha Tendril attacks that he gets deal a mortal wound each time they hit, so you average something like 2 or 3 mortal wounds on the enemy per fight phase with that, could be up to 4 if you roll very very well. For Alpha Legion, again I'm not the biggest fan of theirs. Maybe the Mind Veil seems like one of the most interesting. You get plus d6 inches to your move and get to move through enemy models and terrain. Could be particularly good on a slow unit like a Terminator Lord perhaps. It is infantry only though, so no putting it on Demon Princes. For Emperor's Children, I think Fatal Solency seems to be one of the best. At the end of your movement phase, you get to pick one enemy unit, roll 6d6, and your chosen unit within 12 inches takes a mortal wound for every 4+, so usually casually handing out a very big 3 mortal wounds just from one character being nearby the enemy. Dealing damage in the movement phase is pretty relevant as well. It could be a way to pile some more damage on things like Catan or Abaddon the Despoiler. For Red Corsairs, they only have 3, but the Traitor's Laurels don't seem terrible. +1 attack will help out, 1 epic deed costing 0 CP is nice, and units within 6 inches ignoring combat attrition isn't loads, but it might save a model from time to time. Finally, for Creations of Bile, they have a couple of ones I quite like. The Helm of Horsing to farm some command points, or perhaps that Living Carapace for some mad survivability, turning enemy damage rolls into 1. In their White Dwarf supplement, the World Eaters, I feel they could have used a few more updates to their relics. I felt like they didn't get quite as much of a nice treatment as the Codex ones. Maybe they're holding out for when the actual Codex releases. Maybe the Berserker Glaive looks like one of the most tempting to pick up. This replaces a Power Axe or Exalted Axe, makes it Strength +2, AP3 and Damage 2, and also gives the bearer a 5+ Feel No Pain. Again, doesn't seem like the worst pick in the world, just because it's a general buff to your damage and durability. Otherwise, Gorefather's interesting enough. Strength +2, AP2 and Damage 3, and wound rolls of 6 cause 3 mortal wounds. A bit swingy on whether or not you roll those big 6s or not, but if you do, then that's going to leave a big mark. Death Guard, on the other hand, again I think are spoilt for choice with relics. They really do have quite a lot of good ones. I think perhaps one of the easiest pickups is Tollkeeper, the one for the Tallyman, and this just gives you an aura of exploding 6s to hit with ranged weapons, so basically a flat boost to any guns nearby. Can be particularly nice for Contemptor Dreadnoughts or other core firepower platforms. It just adds to the Tallyman's really quite good value, buffing a unit as well with +1 to hit, and also generating CP. Loads of other great ones though. The Revolting Stench Vats is a Blightspawn one, and it gives you an aura of never fights first, and it combos with a datasheet rule to basically give you the ultimate this enemy will not fight before you. Really quite nice when paired with a fighty character like say a Lord of Contagion. It can make them a very risky proposition to charge. The Suppurating Plate is quite an interesting one for a Demon Prince, gives you a 2+ save and reflects some mortal wounds back at the enemy. Post Armour of Contempt, it's looking even nicer than ever. The Plague Skull of Glyphilla can let your character vomit out a bunch of mortal wounds, a single attack once per game that usually averages 3 or 4 mortal wounds on an enemy within 6 inches. I've often seen that used on Malignant Plague casters who might follow it down with a Smite or something for even more. And out of the Plague Company relics, the Warp Insect Hive from Mortarian's Anvil I think is worth a mention. If you want a character fighting better, then this is the way to do so. You get to reroll hits and wounds in melee. Very nice on either a Lord of Contagion or a Death Guard Demon Prince. For the Sorcerous Brethren, I've chosen the Umbralific Crystal as the most standout one for the Thousand Suns. Again, this is a teleportation ability. You select one infantry unit anywhere within 6 inches, and you deploy it anywhere greater than 9 inches from enemy units on the battlefield. Tends to be a pretty nice ability to teleport units whenever it comes up. I think it might be particularly relevant for the Thousand Suns though, as their powerful Rubric Marines and Scarab Occult Terminators move very slowly. Between this and a Cult of Duplicity spell, you could have a lot of units bouncing around the board. Otherwise, I feel like they've got a lot of relics that are sort of borderline. Helm of the Demon's Eye to farm some CP, the Athenaean Scrolls to cast one spell on a 3d6, Eglahen's Orrery can buff some nearby dreadnoughts, quite nice for core firepower to ignore modifiers and damage modifiers. The Conniving Plate is a very nice durability boost, again probably best on a Demon Prince, a 2+ save, and you can only allocate half of your attacks to it, and that makes it a nightmare to shift in melee. Finally, Incandium is a heavy Warp Flamer type staff with AP -2. That seems like it could be an okay choice for aspiring sorcerers if you just wanted yet more Warp Flame in your life. For the demons, perhaps one of the stronger choices is the Impossible Robe on the Lord of Change. The Lord of Change can pick up that Warlord trait for -1 damage, and then you can pair it with the Impossible Robe for a 3+ invul, which is very nice for command point rerolling if you happen to suffer a very high damage attack. In addition, you also get a single free reroll for a save once per game, often best to save until the very last wound that you're about to take, because if you still fail a save, then the bearer is removed as a casualty. Overall though, just a very nice durability boost. Otherwise, some of the more commonly played relics are Slanesh ones, as Masskeeper of Secrets seems to be the best way to play demons these days. Silver Strike is a Wit Stealer sword that gives you an extra 2 attacks, can't really go too far wrong with that. And the Forbidden Gem is a potentially big power move, where you have a decent chance to basically hypnotize a character in the combat phase within 12 inches once per game, and it basically stops them from doing anything whatsoever. If you did have a monstrously powerful character charge into your army nearby, then this can basically turn them off for a turn. Lastly, for Chaos, we come to the Chaos Knights, again with the Imperial. Again, similar to the Imperial Knights, I think quite a lot of them are solid enough. I would say that maybe just the raw choice available isn't quite as big as the Imperials though. Perhaps one of the easiest pickups is the Veil of Medringard. That's the Iconoclast one that just gives you a 4+ invul at range and 6+ in melee. It will likely save you command points on rotating Ion Shields when that knight is targeted. A 4+ invul on a great big Titanic Lord of War is usually excellent. Otherwise, the Daemonus amps up a Laser Destroyer, gives you strength 16, AP -5, D3+6 damage, but most importantly gives you a flat 3 shots rather than 2, so it's basically plus 50% damage on a fairly devastating anti-tank weapon. If you are taking a Desecrator, that one is quite tempting. The Helm of Dogs is a really solid one as well. Reroll 1s for nearby War Dogs to wound, and +1 attacks to the War Dog in question. Maybe quite nice on something like a War Dog Stalker, buffing a couple of the more ranged variants perhaps. Again, they can access a 2+ armor save, and for the knights that have Terror Shades, the Soul Raptor Swarm can be an interesting choice to give you a decent amount of protection against powerful psychic out there, a 4+ save against mortal wounds, and you also happen to regenerate wounds for fleeing models nearby, though that bit's a fair bit less reliable. Lastly, we come to the Xenos, and starting out with the Craftworlds, I do quite like their Sunstorm bike. It basically lets one of your Psychers or Autarchs just jump onto an objective and lightly take it, as it gives them the insanely rapid move of 20 and also objective secures. If they can also do a bit of damage either with the shurikens, psychic powers or melee, then that's so much the better. After you just need to try and score as many victory points, it could be quite an easy way to flip objectives late game, and ensure that you can reach a few more far-flung objectives to score them before the game ends. Otherwise, Kurnos' bow is an interesting choice, particularly for the Hail of Doom craft world. It's a 3-shot shuriken pistol that if it wounds things, then it deals a mortal wound, and it means that you can basically convert Strands of Fate straight into mortal wounds, as a hit roll of a 6 will become an auto wound of a 6. Quite popular on fast-moving Farseers, as they can pretty much guarantee firing out a few mortal wounds with this, on top of a bit more mortal wound damage like a Smite and maybe Executioner. Otherwise, the Phoenix Gem is quite nice, a 2+ chance for a character to stand up and resurrect on death. Gives you a bit of insurance about being sniped and lets you play a bit more risky with some of them. And the Spirit Stone of Anathlan is an interesting Baal Tarm one. It lets you reroll a psychic test once per phase, and your Psyker knows 1 more power, so has more flexibility. Within the same codex, we have the Harlequins. Segarax Rose is a really popular choice for Fighty Troop Masters. It gives you strength +2, AP2 and damage 3, and reroll all wound rolls. And for a strength 3 character, that's going to turn him into a fairly general purpose melee threat. Particularly 3 wound infantry and even vehicles won't like to get on the wrong side of him. Otherwise, perhaps the Laughing God's Eye is a good one, a 5+ save against mortal wounds. If there's lots of psychic in the meta, this is usually going to be good. For the Dark Eldar, I feel that the Jin Blade is maybe one of the most tempting. It basically turns a standard Archon into an all-around blender, makes him strength 4, AP 3 and damage 3 and plus 2 attacks. With so many attacks flying at the enemy, some of them are going to wound, and if you really want to, you can also pair it with the Warlord trait that allows you to reroll all hits and wound rolls. That'll of course have you stacking far more wounds, and you might even choose to have the Fights Twice ability by making him a Master Archon. If you can get all three of those in play, then you've got a guy who could pretty much rinse a squad of elite infantry in a single turn. Otherwise, for the dangerous fighty succubi, the Triptych Whip is nice, always wounds on a 2+ besides vehicles, AP 3, damage 2 and plus 3 attacks. There's not really many better relics in the game for just clearing out a squad of Space Marines. Otherwise, the Animus Vitae is a grenade that allows you to get +1 to your power of pain for the whole army, while dealing a couple of mortal wounds too. And for another one of the very fighty succubi builds, you can combine the Dark Lotus Toxin with Razor Flails. This makes them +1 strength and +1 damage. And Cult of Strife succubi seem to quite like combining that with the one that means they get to attack again if their attacks don't reach the inflicts damage step. Over to the Swarms now, and perhaps one of the strongest Nids choices might be the Reaper of Obliterax. It certainly made a name for itself on Winged Hive Tyrants recently, a damage 3 bone sword that deals 1 extra mortal wound for every successful wound roll. It also ignores any feel no pain type saves and things, or abilities like Catan where you can only take a certain amount of wounds in a phase. It's very dangerous on a Winged Hive Tyrant with a massive threat range of 17 inches then charge, and then plus D3 attacks on the charge from a stratagem with their adrenal glands. The Hive Tyrants did go up in cost a bit, and they became a bit less flexible, but I still think just the raw utility of this thing looks amazing. Otherwise, for a walking Hive Tyrant, you could pick up Shard Gullet, the massively dangerous heavy venom cannon that gives you 3 shots at strength 12, AP -5 and damage 5. There aren't a whole load of vehicles that want to be hit by that kind of thing. And otherwise the Resonance Barb is quite nice for +1 to cast with Neurothropes, or potentially the Gestation Sac, an ability to spawn a small unit of Rippers, perhaps particularly nice to double down on the Ripper spawning shenanigans of the Parasite and Mortrex, putting annoying units to contest objectives or lock enemies up. For their cultist allies, one strong choice for the Genestealer Cults is the Unwilling Orb. This one's a psychic defense relic, so it's a little bit situational, but it is perhaps one of the better ones in the game. It means that your Psyker can deny psychic powers literally anywhere on the table, you can't outrange it, so for psychic armies it means they can basically never be too comfortable that they're going to pass a spell, and you might suddenly have your mages roll well and shut it down. On top of that, you can also deny an extra power, so you can do it twice, and on top of that, you get +1 to cast Maledictions and Witchfires, particularly the Mass Hypnosis one to make enemies fight last. That's pretty awesome. Otherwise, for the Kellamorph, a very common choice is the Wormtooth rounds. That's the heavy shots that allow their pistols to fire a single strength 6 AP 3 damage 3 round each, and for each hit they get an extra shot, hugely threatening to elite 3 wound infantry, particularly if they pay for that upgrade that gives them automatically exposed when they come in. Finally, if you're taking a Nexos, it's tempting to get them a Cranial Inlay. That's one that allows them to farm command points, and also allows them to broadcast the character's buffs around the board just a little bit more easily. Next up, we've got the Orks, and I feel that their choices will kind of depend on what sort of characters you're running. But if you just want a fighty war boss, then going with Daquila Claw is hardly the worst idea. It's just an all-round strong power claw, damage 3 with no -1 to hit, and a big AP -4 to chew through marines with armor of contempt. And then likely, if you are investing in the boss hitting very good, you can pair it with that brutal but cunning trait and get more attacks for every attack that didn't inflict damage. I think it'd be a rare fight phase when that combo doesn't remove at least a few models. Otherwise, the Super Cyborg body gives you a 4+ invul and half damage, a very big all-round durability boost there, going to make just about any character a massive pain to remove. Edwopper's Kill Chopper gives you a big chopper that's strength ×2, AP 3 and damage 2, and mortal wounds on 6s. That one can be quite good for the knobs on Smasher Squigs. They already deal a bunch of mortal wounds on the charge, and this lets them follow up with some quality attacks. The Crushing Armor is a mega armor that gives you a 4+ invul, +1 to your armor saves, and some mortal wound impact hits. Again, really quite a nice combo of damage and durability. And Resmecha's Redder Armor is a nice one for the speed freaks of the Evil Sons, +2 inches to your movement and makes an enemy unit fight last. Pretty handy on most combat characters, both reaching it and then getting the jump on the opponent. Can be quite fun on kill rigs, that one. Next up, we've got the Necrons. And again, I feel their relic section isn't maybe one of the strongest out there, but the Veil of Darkness does remain very good, teleporting the bearer and one unit across the board, really quite nice for delivering close range shooting things, Gauss Reaper warriors being the most common thing to use it with. Really quite nice as you can throw buffs on the squad before they jump, things like Chronomancer 5+ Invols or My Will Be Done from the Lord, and you've always got the possibility of following up a charge with 20 warriors as well. It'd be a bit unreliable, but if they get in, they could certainly swarm an objective or bully a backfield unit. Otherwise, the Voltaic Staff is quite nice for a whole bunch of Strength 6 AP2 Damage 2 shots from a Staff of Light, not too bad on something like a Catacomb Command Barge to add to the rest of the fire. And the Orb of Eternity is a fun choice to amp up Resurrection shenanigans. You point it at your Necron squad, and all the dead ones get back up on a 4+ rather than a 5. Finally, we come to the Forces of the Tau. Kind of hard to compare their relics too much, as they do some very different things. Perhaps one of the most obvious adding value ones, though, is the Humble Stave for Ethereals, which I think is auto-include if you're using an Ethereal that isn't one of those bigger characters. You get +1 to cast your invocations for things like +1 command point or 5+ Feel No Pain, and also you get to cast a second one as well. Arguably this does even more than doubling the value of the standard Ethereal. I do wonder if people might switch to using the characters a little bit more for their ethereal needs though, now that pre-game command points are in a bit more of a rare spot. For some other decent choices though, the Bagel Hunter's Plate gives you +1 to your armor save and a 5+ Feel No Pain. Very solid durability, particularly to a 2+ armor save commander with an Iridium suit or something. Perhaps means that you can afford to play a little bit more aggressively than you would have otherwise. And finally, the Onager Gauntlet I think gives you a massive amount of extra damage. Your melee basically goes from Strength 5, AP nothing, damage 1, to a pretty monumental Strength 12, AP 4 and damage 3, and Crisis Commanders do get 4 attacks as well. So it is a pretty monumental damage increase if you need to follow down some shooting with a charge. It also works with that Warlord trait to reroll all hits and wounds as well, which means that you can have a massively damaging commander both at shooting and charging. So I think that just about brings us to the end of our review of Relics in 40k. Overall there's plenty of fun ones, and there's lots of decent options that I didn't include on this list. Feel free to let me know any ones that you think I skipped over a bit, or any particularly devastating experiences that you have had using any on the list. I think it is kind of hard to weigh up any sort of best overall with the Relics, as they all buff different units in different ways. I think maybe if I did have to pick one single winner, it might well be that Grey Knight Grandmaster's Sigil of Exigence, just because it adds so much value to a character to basically just say no to shooting once per game and also get a free redeploy out of it. Really quite meaningful on such a threatening model. I think we'll leave that there though. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k stuff coming, with new videos out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find it down in the video description below. Making all this content does take an awful lot of time and effort, and if you are enjoying quite a bit, then any support is massively appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.